Hello, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of the TRT World Forum 2020. I'm Ali Aslan, and it's my great pleasure to host and moderate this upcoming high-level session titled New Realities in Foreign Affairs and International Relations After COVID-19. Well, I think we can all agree that the pandemic has affected all of our lives in a very deep, profound, substantial way. And foreign affairs and international relations are, of course, no exception of those. How has diplomacy changed in times of a pandemic? And what will the future of diplomacy look like? That's what we will discuss with 3 high-level distinguished foreign ministers in just a moment. But first up, to kick off this session, it's my great pleasure to welcome and yield the virtual debate floor to the Turkish Foreign Minister, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu.
Thank you very much, Ali Bey, for this opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to address you today, and it is my honor to be at the same panel with my dear friends, Foreign Ministers Pekka Haavisto and Mahmut Qureshi. TRT World has become a major global news outlet in just 5 years. And this forum has already become a well-known platform, bringing together prominent speakers from around the world. I wish TRT World and the forum continued success. Dear guests, dear participants, the most pressing issue of this year is the coronavirus pandemic. Many lives were lost, economies have suffered, health systems were pushed to their limits. This is an unprecedented global crisis. However, crises also bring opportunities. With this opportunity, it is time to reflect on how we can change the way we do things to better develop a sustainable vision for the aftermath. We should start by identifying the new realities as the title of this forum suggests. First, the pandemic revealed the weaknesses of the current multilateral system. It reaffirmed the validity of our call for the reform of international organizations. That's why we highlighted the need to promote multilateralism and strong institutions in the time of the pandemic. A few examples. We strongly supported the efforts within the G20. In MICTA, we underlined the importance of robust international cooperation together with Mexico, Indonesia, the Republic of Korea, and Australia. We invited the leaders of the Turkish Council for an extraordinary summit to better address the challenges. We called for an executive committee meeting in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation with similar aim. We co-sponsored the UN General Assembly resolution calling for fair, transparent, and equitable access to essential medical supplies and any future vaccines. We joined the EU's Coronavirus Global Response Pledging Conference, and we also took part in the Global Vaccine Summit. Second, with the understanding that nobody is safe until everybody is safe, we actively engage in humanitarian efforts worldwide. We provided medical supplies to 156 countries and 11 international organizations. Before the outbreak, we were already the top donor country in humanitarian and development assistance. And the coronavirus outbreak has just earned us another badge of honor. And we became the largest supplier of medical aid worldwide. Turkey brought back more than 100,000 Turkish citizens from 141 countries. While we were busy with the most comprehensive repatriation operation in our history, we didn't forget other nations. Our repatriation flights also took on board around 5,500 foreigners from 67 different countries. We benefited, of course, from our extensive diplomatic network and the capabilities of Turkish Airlines. Having the 5th largest diplomatic network and the 4th largest flight network in the world made a huge difference. Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to the geopolitics, it is a permanent reality of interstate relations, and this will also be true for the post-COVID era. A few actors have been actively destabilizing our region. Turkey has been playing a key role in standing against these attempts. In the Eastern Mediterranean, our primary concern is to protect our rights as well as those of the Turkish Cypriots, while Greece and the Greek Cypriots are trying to impose their unilateral and maximalist approach on us. We frequently see how EU solidarity is abused to promote the nationalist agenda of these members. Recently, Operation Irini was used as a tool against Turkey. On November 22nd, the operation ordered the boarding of a Turkish flagged commercial vessel without our prior consent. This was a clear violation of international law. Crew members were mistreated and harassed. At the end of an 11-hour-long search, nothing in violation of the arms embargo was found on board. And we strongly protest this illegal act. UN Security Council resolutions on the Libyan arms embargo do not overrule the freedom of navigation. Of course, we reserve our right to resort to every available legal and legitimate tool to respond. In any case, dear friends, as Turkey, we are ready for dialogue and cooperation in the Eastern Mediterranean. This is why we called for an Eastern Mediterranean regional conference with the participation of all littoral states, including the Turkish Cypriots. In Syria, our military operations cleared over 8,000 square kilometers from Daesh and the PKK-YPG. Thanks to our efforts, more than 411,000 Syrians returned home. Our presence in Idlib prevented yet another humanitarian disaster and the wave of immigration. Our efforts as Astana guarantors, together with the UN, paved the way for the work of the Constitutional Committee. In Libya, we took the initiative to prevent another humanitarian disaster. Turkey's training and advisory support for the UN-recognized Libyan government prevented a civil war. It also opened the way for the UN-led political process. Dear participants, dear friends, the illegal invasion of 1/5 of Azerbaijani territory since the early 90s was deemed a frozen conflict. Recent developments have shown that there is no frozen conflict. A conflict is a conflict, and it can escalate at any moment. It is not these conflicts that are frozen. What is frozen is their solutions. When Armenia continued its aggression through repeated attacks, the conflict turned violent again. On the basis of Azerbaijan's territorial integrity and sovereignty, we supported a negotiated solution based on international law and UN Security Council resolutions. At the end, we welcomed the joint statement signed between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Russia. Upon Azerbaijan's request, Turkey will also undertake a role to preserve peace and monitor the ceasefire. Dear friends, had Turkey remained inactive in the face of such destabilizing developments, we will have faced much greater problems. In fact, what we do is also good for NATO. Today, we continue our meetings within the Alliance's foreign ministry. Unfortunately, at every turn, we always have to start from the beginning and wait for our friends to see the obvious. Turkey is a strong NATO ally and sees its future in Europe. Once we overcome the current confusion existing mostly on the European side, I believe that the historic step of Turkey's accession to the European Union can be taken. This will also have a transformative effect on our wider neighborhood as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't see foreign policy as a static area of public domain. We don't view it through geopolitical lenses only. As times change, the instruments of diplomacy must also adapt. Last year, I announced 3 major foreign policy initiatives. The pandemic has reaffirmed their relevance and importance. Our digital diplomacy initiative was announced well before the pandemic. Our aim is to improve our digital infrastructure and use the transformative power of new technologies in all areas of our diplomatic work. The second initiative, named Asia Anew, aims to advance Turkey's engagement with the region through a more holistic and long-term approach. This initiative complements our successful engagement activities in Africa and Latin America. Last but not least, with growing uncertainty, complexity, and change, it is a necessity to create innovative platforms to discuss regional and global issues, as TRT World is doing. The Antalya Diplomacy Forum aims to do exactly that. At the same time, Turkey will continue its more well-established approach towards building regional cooperation in the Balkans, Central Asia, and around Afghanistan, including brotherly country Pakistan. We will continue to promote global initiatives like the Mediation for Peace we are co-chairing with Finland. We will stand against xenophobia and animosity against Islam while promoting the alliance of the civilizations. Turkish diplomats are already chairing the UN General Assembly and the UNESCO General Conference to achieve effective multilateralism. As I look ahead to the post-pandemic world, the need for Turkey's enterprising and humanitarian diplomacy will be as great as ever. Let me stop here to give the floor to my colleagues and look forward having your questions. I'll do my best to answer your questions as well. Thank you very much, Ali Bey.
Thank you so much, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, for kicking off this session and your preliminary remarks. Much to talk about, of course, throughout the remainder of the session. But first, let me introduce the other 2 panelists, very distinguished panelists. First up, we have the Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi with us. Welcome. And welcome indeed also to the Finnish Foreign Minister Pekka Haavisto. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. And let's dive right in. Foreign Minister Qureshi, obviously face-to-face meetings, in-person interactions, these are all key aspects of diplomacy, traveling, being on site. Of course, the pandemic has made all these somewhat difficult. What are the challenges these days to conducting diplomacy? What are the challenges to conducting diplomacy in times of a pandemic?
Well, thank you. Let me begin by thanking the TRT Forum for this invitation to be on the panel for this discussion. I am glad to know that in the last 5 years, you have covered considerable ground, and this forum has become a very well-known, well-respected forum. I'm happy to share this platform with the Foreign Minister of Turkey and the Foreign Minister of Finland, who are well-known friends. This pandemic, which is the topic and very well chosen, because of over 60 million people around the globe having been infected and having lost 1.4 million lives, is perhaps the right topic, and it was the need of the hour. Pakistan, like the rest of the world, despite the new foreign policy challenges, has been dealing with this challenge. And I would say rather well, in the sense that we were able to contain it to a large extent. We are going through our second wave, which is a bit of a concern because the numbers are rising. In the last 24 hours, we've had 66 new deaths in the country. But on the whole, we managed the crisis reasonably well so far. Obviously, the pandemic has had an impact on how we conduct foreign policy. The fact that here, through this forum, three foreign ministers are engaging with you and are discussing regional, international issues of global nature, issues of the challenge of the pandemic, its impact on human lives, its impact on international economy, the challenge of the growing challenge of climate change, which we are about to face, or we are facing, and will be facing, immediately after we have dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic. So such interactions, this virtual connection is useful. But when we talk of the new instruments for foreign policy and our new approach, we also have to see the environment that we are working in. Before the pandemic hit us, one could easily see a retreat in globalization. The tendency of protectionism was on the rise. One could see multilateralism on the decline. And as the Foreign Minister of Turkey just mentioned, it is a challenge that we need to deal with. And, we are supporters of multilateralism. We saw and we are seeing an increasing trend in foreign policy, unilateral trends. And these unilateral trends, in an environment where there's growing competition, where there's confrontation and divisions on the rise, can be very destabilizing. It can undermine global stability, security, peace. We are seeing a resurgence of old conflicts. For example, here in this region in South Asia, the Kashmir dispute is one of the oldest on the agenda of the Security Council. But we have seen a new resurgence, a new rise in concerns in Jammu and Kashmir, the atrocities being committed, the fundamental rights being suspended, the kind of military siege that, over 8 million people are in, living in an open prison. These are the new challenges we are seeing. And we are seeing some new rivalries on the rise. And foreign policy during the pandemic and post-pandemic will have to, many of us will have to deal with them. For example, this rising tension between China and the US. Now, Pakistan has had a very old relationship with the United States. We also opened the doors for the US, for the US to Beijing, and helped develop this new understanding earlier on. But we see a new rising tension, and we have an old ally in the US and a strategic ally in China. So how do we maintain this balance, this very delicate balance? Then we see, within Europe, the Foreign Minister of Turkey mentioned Europe, how Europe today is facing new challenges, and how Europe is dealing with those challenges. The challenge of immigration, for example, and divisions within Europe. And you see Brexit, and you see a very important country departing from the European Union. So the question is, international stability is under threat, and how we have to see that we can collectively promote multilateralism and stability within our region and obviously beyond our region. One thing that has become very clear today, and that
indeed,
is,
Foreign Minister, if I may just jump in, because you have given us quite a few challenges, quite a wonderful, comprehensive outlook on what the challenges are of conducting diplomacy in a time of pandemic. I want to build upon this and come back to you in just a moment. But first, Foreign Minister Haavisto, again, the same question to you, obviously. If it weren't for the pandemic, as Foreign Minister Qureshi pointed out, we would all be on a stage in Istanbul probably right now. As it is, we have to conduct this panel virtually. Therefore, and many of the diplomacy that you have to conduct, I would imagine, is also done on a virtual level these days. How challenging is it for you?
Thank you, moderator, and first of all, thanking Turkish radio and television for this World Forum. And I really agree that I would love to be in Istanbul instead of my office, meeting my good colleagues, Minister Çavuşoğlu and Minister Qureshi. And I just want to also confirm that we have been already so many times online during this COVID-19 pandemic with my colleagues, either bilaterally or in different international occasions. And of course, it's I would say that what is missing from these meetings is, of course, the very important corridor diplomacy that we of course, can hear our statements and respond, but usually in the physical meetings, then you can also have a more unofficial part, and that is what is missing during the corona pandemic. I also appreciate, I just want to raise it in the beginning, that while we might have different views on issues, I think Minister Çavuşoğlu mentioned many issues where Turkey is also involved, Libya, Syria, Eastern Mediterranean. We might have even totally different views, but we are always dealing in our communication these issues with respect and dignity, understanding each other's viewpoints and trying to create compromises and policies ahead. And I think it's even more important during these times of pandemic and when we have to deal online. Maybe just on the Finnish situation, I know that in the world news there is always that Finland is a model country to treat the corona pandemic. We have had so far quite little cases on the second wave, but unfortunately that is even increasing in Finland. So we are not. This is not the safe haven for in the middle of pandemics, but also the second wave is spreading, and we have to be act very responsible way also here. Of course, people are wearing the masks and trying to do the distant work and so forth, but we are waiting with some even raising and bigger concerns the Christmas time. Let me also mention that I think my colleague, the Minister for Pakistan, Mr. Qureshi, mentioned many of those topics that are at the same time on our table: the climate issue, peace and security issues. Let us just look the Horn of Africa and what's going on in Ethiopia area today, increasing amount of refugees and so forth. And we have to deal with all these issues, and these will be left even after the pandemic and after the effective vaccination. Environmental issues are very, very burning at the moment. And what is important, I think the idea that was also presented by my colleagues, that in this crisis might be also some solutions. And that's why we are very much looking at the green recovery and the circular economy and taking the environment and climate issues in all these funding projects that are made due to the corona crisis. I also want to agree what Minister Çavuşoğlu raised on WHO and its important role, and the multilateralism was praised by both of my colleagues. Finland has a very similar standpoint that we really need international community and UN here. And when US was cutting its funding from WHO, we also increased from the Finnish side our support, and hopefully now when we see the regime change in US, also these policies will change. Let me then just finish by mentioning the Eastern Mediterranean concern has been, which Minister Savusoglu mentioned, also a very big concern for us and in the European Union. We have been really asking for a peaceful, negotiated solution to this. I think one-sided action is never good in solving the conflicts. And I very much appreciate also our previous cooperation with Turkey as chairing this Friends of the Mediation group in New York in the UN context as part of the multilateralism. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Foreign Minister Haavisto. But Finland, you say, is no safe haven. But if we're looking at the record, it looks actually comparatively quite good. 25,000 cases, 400 casualties in a nation of 5.5 million people. That is not, obviously, is no reason to be jubilant, but certainly in a bigger scheme of things, one can say objectively that Finland has done a good job of containing this virus. Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, let me also bring you in again and pose the same question to you, because obviously you're someone who's known to be on the roads all the time, traveling, conducting diplomacy on site, meeting your counterparts, something that all of us and you as foreign minister certainly are somewhat feeling restricted these days. What challenge are you facing in exercising your duties these days?
Well, of course, pandemic affected our work as well. And despite the pandemic, I tried to visit many countries. I paid a visit to Latin American region. And despite this pandemic, we played an important role together with European Union to bring the government and the opposition parties and to resolve their many outstanding issues. And it bears fruits. I have to say, I'm very happy that we work with European Union. So if EU wants to be a global actor, they should rather try to work Turkey actively instead of trying to isolate Turkey. I don't mean Finland and the other countries who are strongly supporting Turkey-EU relations. And I also visited Africa 3 times and 2 times to Niger, and 6 countries I visited. And I also visited some European countries and the regional countries. I was in Azerbaijan many times. But like in all other scopes of our lives, the pandemic also affected the way we work. And we also witnessed an accelerated digitalization in our working lives, like TRT is organizing this forum virtually is a good example. At our ministry, we are also adapting ourselves to the rapidly changing circumstances. As I underlined, we announced digital diplomacy initiative before the outbreak. So we were prepared for the new normal, actually. Throughout the pandemic, I communicated, in addition to those visits that I mentioned, many counterparts, mostly online, and attended a total of 68 diplomatic video conferences. And my ministry also moved its events to online platforms. And this year's Ambassadors Conference was organized virtually. Actually, we tried new technology, and this is the domestic technology. And it worked very well. We brought all the ambassadors from all over the world online, and we were really satisfied with this. So I'm very grateful to Turkcell. And the annual Istanbul Mediation Conference also held online for the first time. And now this is, the technology that I mentioned is also the green box technology that also we use at different platforms during the webinars as well. So many webinars also we organized virtually this year. So yes, it has been a challenge, right. But I think as the other ministries did, we also tried our best to continue our activities. Thank you.
These are challenging times, no doubt, for everyone, not the least foreign ministers such as yourself. But as I hear, you are adjusting to the new realities, as of course are all other countries. For Mr. Qureshi, it's already been said that multilateralism and international cooperation are needed more than ever. After all, this pandemic requires a global response rather than a unilateral one. And Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu already pointed out in his opening remarks that essentially no country is safe until all countries are. But what we're seeing in effect are responses are largely universal, aren't they not? Some might even say that we are seeing a new nationalism taking hold, and your preliminary remarks indicated that as well. Would you agree that the pandemic has not fostered the kind of cooperation that is needed, but rather fostered and promoted and brought upon a new level of nationalism?
Well, to begin with, let me comment that I think the world was not prepared for this challenge. As I said, we were gradually transiting towards, protectionism from globalization. Multilateralism was receding, and you saw unilateralism on the rise, and it has had an impact. It has had an impact on how states have responded to different challenges. What was required for this challenge to be dealt effectively was a multilateral, holistic, cooperative approach. But what you saw was a initial knee-jerk reaction, and every country fending for itself, sealing borders, trying to protect their people, their economies, not realizing, as for Mr. Visto said, that nobody is safe till everyone is safe. That realization had not sunk in. Gradually, this pandemic has now made us realize that we are a different world. We are an interconnected world, a world which has more of interdependence today than ever before. People, generations living before us were dealing with a different situation. Today, if there is a contraction in the economy of Europe or of the United States, I, sitting in Pakistan, am directly affected. My exports are affected. My remittances are affected when 50% of my foreign exchange earnings are dependent on remittances. So it's a different world that we are dealing with, and that is why we need to change our approach and make it multilateral, cooperative, and that is why Pakistan undertook we made three suggestions, and we have said, since it's a global challenge, it requires a global response. Many countries, developing countries, are at a disadvantage. They need help. They have limited fiscal space. That is why the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Prime Minister Imran Khan, launched an initiative called the Global Initiative for Debt Relief, asking the world to help the developing world, because if the developing world goes under, willy-nilly, you will get affected. So help help them, give them the fiscal space so that they can invest in their fragile health sectors, and they can protect lives. One. The other thing that we have been advocating is, let's drop the commercial approach to the COVID-19 vaccine. Many countries are doing research, but what we need is more of sharing. For example, we need more, sharing of health data, medical expertise, life-saving protective gear. Initially, everybody was for themselves, and countries were desperate for ventilators, couldn't buy ventilators because they were not available. Even they were willing to pay, but they were not available. That is why cooperation in scientific research is important, and that is why Pakistan has suggested that we need this vaccine for greater public good. Make it affordable, make it accessible for everyone. And finally, let's not get into stigmatization. when we get into stigmatization, then we lose that cooperative approach. For example, there were initially in the initial period, there was finger pointing, the Chinese virus, then there was some finger pointing calling Muslims as super spreaders of this virus. These were things that we need to avoid and have a more cooperative approach to deal with this challenge.
Thank you so much for laying out the Pakistani strategies and approach to this pandemic and how to overcome battling nationalism and fostering international cooperations in time like these, more than ever needed. Foreign Minister Haavisto, what we've seen at the beginning of this very pandemic in the European Union was a lack of cooperation. No, we've seen unilateral border closures. We've seen everyone was fending out there for themselves. The EU has now managed to somewhat come together, presented a recovery plan. But how challenging do you find 28 to now 27 EU member states, of course, coming together and presenting a unified front in this battle, also considering that now the battle and the race for the vaccine is full on?
No, thank you, and I think you touch a very important point, how the EU cooperation works in this kind of times of crisis, and certainly when you look back in the spring, there are many issues that you could do better, and exactly that happened, that borders were closed in an uncoordinated way, or protective material was stopped at the borders, and ventilators were also mentioned here. Many countries have shortage of those, but actually quite rapidly then after the first shock, also cooperation started to emerge. Of course, the issue that also Turkish minister mentioned, that our citizens were brought back from different countries. Also, one time Turkish Airlines, you made a big effort to that direction. We got our citizens from different parts of the world back to European countries. Finland also made its part with our national flight company Finnair and so forth. Secondly, countries started to take the patients from other countries to their hospitals, showing solidarity through that, and also then start to cooperate on border issues in a more systematic way. So I think we are now on the better side of these things, and now we start to speak about a health union, that we need more comprehensive policies on health issues in European Union. And of course, we have our own recovery plans and recovery funds now under construction. I think that's important. And then what we are doing together is this Team Europe approach, particularly with the African countries, that we act together to help and coordinate our efforts to help many African countries out of this crisis. What was mentioned here, of course, is then I fully agree that blame game is something that we don't need at this moment, of course. But we might ask questions like if there are this kind of wild meat markets where maybe the Covid-19 started, can we do something together? Could international community do something together to prevent similar crises to appear? What could be the role of WHO in preventing these crises? And exactly the issue that was mentioned here, the vaccination issue. How do we get the vaccination to people so that all citizens of the world have the same rights to protect themselves from this? Maybe a joke to finish this part, when people are always asking, how did you in Finland manage with the 2 meters social distance? Because usually you keep 5 meters social distance here in Finland. So was this advice difficult for you? So we are actually, this social isolation and keeping the distances is very much in our blood. So it was easier maybe here than some other European countries. But it's important that we are now working together, coordinating our actions together, and I think we are now on the better side, even if as we see, the COVID-19 situation is quite bad still in many European countries. Back to you.
Right. Thank you, Foreign Minister. So if I understand you correctly, the Finnish people were made for social distancing. This actually works in their favor in this particular regard. But all joking aside, Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, this pandemic, and I think it's become very clear throughout this discussion, has shaken up the old structures. Do you believe that the new realities that we're facing in foreign affairs these days will be reversed once this pandemic is over? Or do you believe that these changes, that the virus merely served as an accelerator for these changes that are already in motion?
No. Ali Bey, since the beginning of the pandemic, experts have speculated on post-pandemic world. Most agreed that this year will be a turning point and a year zero, if you will. But what comes next? Some argued that the pandemic will bring the end of globalization. Others said it is the first truly global development. Some claim that the pandemic will be a geopolitical game changer. Others argued it will accelerate existing trends. And I asked my staff to make an assessment very early this year. And we conducted two parallel studies. On the one side, we compiled the view of leading thinkers in Turkey and then the world. I have two books here. I sent the copies of these two books to my dear colleagues, Pekka and Mahmoud Qureshi. And these books are covering the views of the scholars and from all over the world and Turkey. And if anybody is interested, by the way, we have Turkish and English versions. We can also ship them to you. And also we develop our own foresight. We identify the trends that will accelerate due to COVID-19 first. As also mentioned in my speech, you also underlined that the pandemic underlined the shortcomings of the existing multilateral system. And the current system and its institutions couldn't respond to the pandemic in a timely and effective manner, unfortunately. For example, it took 100 days for the United Nations Security Council to adopt a resolution on the matter. Second, the pandemic has worsened fragilities and conflicts. The mediation efforts that we are co-chairing were also impaired, to be chairing with Finland, and the importance of resilience and good governance was reaffirmed. Third, geopolitical competition has increased. The rivalry between the US and China was already widening, deepening, but the competition is not only restricted to great powers. Many conflicts are now internationalized, unfortunately. And the rise of Asia was a fact long before the pandemic. And the signing, I'm talking about the opportunities, of course, right now, and the signing of the RCEP as the world's largest regional trade arrangement show that Asia will continue its upward trend. Last but not least, the pandemic has pushed us into the future. And this is a rehearsal for the digital age, and the fact that, again, that TRT is organizing this forum virtually is an example. So I do not believe there will be a return to the previous normal, but instead a speedy transition to a new normal that we should all adapt ourselves. Thank you. Back to you.
So reversal to the pre-pandemic world, if I understand you correctly, is not realistic. On the contrary, we need to adapt and adjust to what future holds, which in a post-pandemic world. So Foreign Minister Qureshi, speaking of the future, the present and of the future, of course, do you, as a seasoned foreign minister and diplomat, do you see an upside to the current situation? Of course, the pandemic has affected us all profoundly, mostly negatively, but do you see an upside to this current situation? Has the pandemic perhaps the power to bring countries with diplomatic problems together in times like these?
Certainly, yes, there is a great possibility. But let me also share with you some of my thoughts. You know, pandemic also highlighted one thing: the limitation of international institutions. For example, when we needed WHO the most. Some of us were, withdrawing from WHO and sort of not cooperating. When the Secretary General of the United Nations calls for a immediate ceasefire in different conflict zones of the world and deal with this pandemic, nobody pays heed to his call. That was another challenge. And in our region, in South Asia, across the line of control on the Indian occupied side of Kashmir, we see a new intensification of ceasefire violations. If you compare the violations that took place in 2019 and see the increased intensification of violations in 2020 during the pandemic, you see that they went the opposite way. They paid no heed to what the Secretary General was saying. Now, obviously, there is another realization that the pandemic, well, these things were simmering. I'm not saying they've just born out of the pandemic. They were simmering, but they hastened. The pandemic hastened the process, and we are dealing with new challenges. For example, I feel intolerance is on the rise. And you see Islamophobia, xenophobia, very much there, and we have to deal with that. We see discrimination and discriminatory policies being pursued by many states. I'll give you a very good example of here again of my neighbor in the East, India. They have a population of 180 million Muslims, right? They're a minority, but they're a sizable number, 180 million. But what do? They bring in new legislation, Citizen Amendment Act, discriminatory in nature for a large minority living within, Muslim minority living within India. We see racism on the rise. And, you saw what happened in the US prior to the presidential election, and how that gave rise to a new movement, Black Lives Matter. And nationalism, you see, protectionism, immigration, how immigrants, economic immigrants, have been dealt with very harshly, I must say, very harshly, in a very callous manner. And you've seen people dying, and starving and suffering. These need to be addressed. Can I also make one last point, and that is, during the pandemic, one saw, you talked of geopolitical, changes and conflicts. Here again, unfortunately, some in our region, instead of cooperation, went the other way and took advantage of international diversion to, sort of increase their stranglehold on disputed territories like Jammu and Kashmir. You saw new restrictions imposed. You saw a new communication blockade over there. You saw how fundamental rights were just suspended and done away with. And you saw new measures, announced, which were against international law. Demographic changes being sort of forced on people, violating the Fourth Geneva Convention, international law, the UN Charter. So, where the world required more cooperation, there were tendencies of taking advantage of a situation in a very inhumane, a very inhumane approach was adopted. Now, these are the new realities that we have to deal with in foreign policy and find a way. What's the way forward? Obviously, interstate diplomacy is the way forward. Obviously, dialogue is the way forward, and Pakistan has been advocating it. For example, when the world was not paying attention to Pakistan, we were saying there is no military solution to Afghanistan, and only a negotiated political settlement is required. And today, the world has finally converged to that point. Now, we are saying, please do not ignore South Asia. There are two nuclear states, confronting each other. And if you do not pay heed, if you do not pay attention to this simmering problem, this dispute, then there could be a problem and the world will get sucked in, even if you don't want to. You want to stay away, you don't want to take sides, but you will have to. You will have to jump in unless and until you intervene in time through dialogue, through diplomacy, and resolve the issue.
Certainly a region that we ignore at our own peril for sure. But for Mr. Haavisto, I will give you the last word and come back to you in just a second, but only because Foreign Minister Qureshi mentioned the rise in xenophobia, racism, and Islamophobia. I just want to give Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu a chance, quick opportunity to respond to that, because I know, Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, these are all topics that are dear to your heart, that you draw attention to wherever you go. Do you believe that the pandemic has helped perpetuate these negative tendencies?
Indeed. COVID-19, Ali Bey, started off as a public health issue, but evolved into, unfortunately, global crisis with severe social and economic implications as well. We raised some of the issues in our previous remarks. The pandemic increased global poverty and inequality and eroded sustainable development gains. It's also exacerbated the already rising trends, as you mentioned, of xenophobia, intolerance, racism, and Islamophobia. And unfortunately, Europe is the focal point of such negative trends. And I don't include, of course, Finland, but in the Western Europe, we see this very clearly. And we are concerned that Europe is becoming hostage to populists, racist and anti-migrant discourses each passing day. Offensive publications, defamation, and hate speech against Islam and Muslims are on the rise, unfortunately. And the security and well-being of the millions of Muslims in Europe are under threat. Why I see that? I see the attacks towards Muslims and the mosque and masjids in all foreigners in many different parts of the Europe, unfortunately. Having suffered from different forms of terrorism for decades, we know well how solidarity is a must in fighting against terrorism, and solidarity must be without ifs or buts. Why I mention this? However, nothing can justify the detainment of at least 14 Muslim children, school-age children, following a raid on their homes by French police under the pretext of counterterrorism. And these children were kept for 11 hours and were not allowed to contact their families. Similarly concerning is the ill treatment of asylum seekers by Greece and Frontex. And despite the practices such as pushbacks being clearly against international law, Europe kept its silence for long. So what we need is vision and moderacy. Populist and racist discourses will only serve to strengthen radicals and terrorists. And political leaders have also special responsibility. We have all, responsibilities to reverse this trend. But if mainstream politicians also support such racist approaches, this is actually what we see today. For small political gains, we will all lose. And I hope this pandemic will encourage more strategic thinking on the side of Europe as well. Thank you.
Minister Haavisto, you will get the last word before we conclude this session. But having listened to both Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu and Foreign Minister Qureshi, one cannot help but be a bit pessimistic. They see the negative tendencies. They've pointed out the many negative tendencies that have emerged throughout this pandemic. How optimistic, how hopeful are you as a Foreign Minister of Finland, as a Foreign Minister of a European Union country, that the multinational system, that the international order, that the community as a whole can come together in a post-pandemic world to move closer together and cooperate closer together rather than highlight these negative tendencies and accentuate and fall back on nationalism?
Let me react also to some of those comments by my ministerial colleagues, because I see, of course, Europe as a continent that has been accepted. A lot of refugees from other conflicts and other countries have been working decently to safeguard the rights of these refugees, but also, of course, is working strongly together against terrorism. I have my full solidarity and sympathy for the victims in France and in Austria and so forth. So it's very important that we also protect our citizens. And I fully agree with the full rights of Muslim citizens, but I also want to say that our Jewish citizens in Europe, in synagogues and others, had to be protected. So I think we have a common task to protect each and everyone in this. And I also want to say that these social movements, like earlier Me Too movement for the rights of women, and now the Black Lives Matter for the rights of Black people, these are changing the world in a very, very remarkable way, and have full sympathy and solidarity for these movements. But then how the world is changing, and could we be optimist or pessimist? I think it's interesting to ask what kind of geopolitical game changer the COVID-19 can be. And of course, there is a certain competition who can recover most rapidly out of COVID pandemic and who can get their economy running. But instead of that, of course, we should have more cooperation on developing the vaccines, getting the access to vaccines to all citizens and so forth. And I have a certain optimism when I see the trends now in the US, particularly on this multilateralism. After the Biden victory, of course, there are signs that their cooperation with WHO would be better. US cooperation on climate change definitely will change, maybe even US approach to the Human Rights Council in the UN and so forth. So we have some positive signs. And I think even if maybe the appeal of the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, to stop the wars during the COVID-19 and concentrate to COVID-19. Maybe it didn't stop all the wars and conflicts as we saw, but it's very, very important that United Nations have this voice, and we support United Nations and its appeals for the peaceful solutions of the conflict. And then maybe finally, I would like to raise the issue that was mentioned by my colleagues also, how this world has changed, more digital, and how do we use the new technologies to communicate and meet each other and share information and so forth. I'm coming from a Nokia country, as you know, so these new developments and new techniques and new digital solutions are very dear to us. And we see that actually through the COVID-19 pandemic, we see a lot of these possibilities developing also in many developing countries. And these can also contribute to the peace and prosperity. And there are good lessons to learn also from COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Well, I think we have all come to adjust and gotten used to virtual debates like these. Let's hope that next year and before too long, we can all meet physically again on a stage. But I think one thing has become for certain throughout this discussion: the pandemic has shaken up the old structures. But one thing is also clear, listening to the three distinguished gentlemen, the three foreign ministers, multilateralism and diplomacy will continue to play a key role in a post-pandemic world. Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, Foreign Minister Qureshi, and Foreign Minister Haavisto, thank you so much indeed for joining us and discussing this very important and timely subject matter. And this wraps up the very first session of day 2 of the TRT World Forum 2020. Stay tuned, much more to come. The next session will continue in 30 minutes, moderated by Rachel Rubel. All the best and have a great day.